Ja, wir schaffen da dran in Recording Setup.
Okay, so I will talk about testing in Elm, but before people who don't know me, my name is Christoph, but people or everyone calls me Stoeffel, even my mother and everyone, and I'm totally not consistent with my username, so I'm ST Stoeffel on GitHub and SCHT on Twitter, and I work at Nordic, the company you probably know. We are building software for students to learn English, to learn how to write. That's our goal. And we are hiring people, but we have a restriction for time difference to San Francisco. We usually don't hire people who are more than 6 hours away from San Francisco, but we make exceptions, as I am one of them. I would love to have more people from Europe, and joining Nordic would be great. Okay, so testing in Elm, and beforehand, this won't be a long talk. I will just talk about basic Elm testing and I will show you how it works on live code. And yeah, maybe there is a discussion, and I have some recommendations for the programming afterwards. Yeah. So I will give you an intro to unit testing, and maybe the more interesting thing is how to test views and render them server side. And who did ever write some Elm tests before? Just you. Okay, did you try to render the view and expect like classes and stuff? Or just
no,
functions?
It was for a game, so I did logic testing.
Okay. So that's the easier part, and the harder part at the moment is server-side rendering, which I will talk about later. Did you use Elm test before version 2.0, or you don't know?
I used it maybe 1 month, 2 months ago. So
okay, then it was probably before 2.0. So there was a lot of change with the latest version, and I think, I'm not sure, but Richard Feldman, who also works at Nordic, did implement a lot of that, and it looks great. So I will just dive into the code, or maybe first some points. It's easy how you install and test. So it's on npm, which may be surprising to beginners, but it's at the moment hard to publish native code, like native bindings to Elm. And we also, for Elm test, we also use some stuff is implemented in JavaScript, so it's on. You have to install Elm test via npm, and then you just have a binary which you can call Elm test init in the project you're working on, and it will generate a structure of the project for testing, and then you can just start there with your tests. One thing that we will see afterwards in the code, it exposes some general stuff you may have seen before in Mocha or some other, maybe horseback or something. So it has described, test, fuss, which is property-based testing. Who heard of property-based testing before? Okay, well, a lot of people. So before there was check, which was for property-based testing, and now it's fused into one testing utility, and I think also a lot of work made by Richard, which I highly appreciate. But we at Nordic are still using 0.16 at the moment, but we are working hard on migrating to 0.17, so we can't use all the nice features Elm test has to offer. But yeah, we are looking forward to it. And then the last thing you expect that thing. Okay, so let's dive into the code. That's how your project looks after you run Elm test init. It generates this test folder, which contains the main tests and the Elm package. And it's crucial that you keep these two, your project and the Elm tests, Elm package JSON in sync. So I would recommend to write a simple script to keep them in sync. And that's maybe a project for afterwards to write together at the Elm hack. Yeah, that's it. So we dive into test. We have this little view, which is basically nothing. No, sorry, I don't go to the view first. I will go into the test first because I will show you how to test the view later. So the basic thing is here. You have a describe for all your tests. So describe is the way to group your tests together. And then we have basic tests, which also has a describe. And it contains a list of tests. You can create a test with the test function, which takes a description and then a function. And that's something that's changed from the previous version. And then you expect stuff. And here we just check if 3 plus 7 is equal to 10 and so on. And here we check something else. And yeah, I think that's easy. And by the way, just interrupt me if you have any questions. And when you run your tests, it outputs this. So we'll just run it once. Okay, it looks like this. And there is also expect fail. And the output looks like this. Failed as expected. Yeah.
There used to be not a runner, but it used to be possible to, like, Elm test didn't have a node component before.
Yeah.
Is it like the same library?
You can, yeah, this is the same library, so you just install Elm test, but you can use custom runners, and there is a really nice HTML runner, also written by Hermann. I will send you the link later.
Okay.
Yeah, it's possible now to write custom runners for whatever. Okay, and then the last thing that is noted here is the fuzz thing, which is actually like Elm check. So you can generate, for this test we have 2 input values, 2 strings, which we fuzz. So we just generate random strings and they get so the test gets run multiple times and gets tested with different strings, and yeah, you can make more general tests with this type of test. It's a bit hard to understand at first, and especially if you dive into how to use your own types. Like if you want to fuzz, like you probably all know the Mario example, and the Mario has a position and the direction and stuff, and you want to create a random fuzzy Mario. Yeah, that's a bit harder. So you can write custom fuzzers, and they need a generator to generate random values for each field of. For example, if you have a record for each for a position, you need to generate a random number, and then you need a shrinker, which shrinks all the random values to smaller values. So if you have a fuzzer for integers and you generate a random integer, it generates, if the first number was 10, it generates maybe 6 and maybe 2 and 0 or something like that. So if you want to do this type of testing, which I recommend, you need to read all the docs. It's really well documented.
In this case, what will it do? Like just string?
This fuzz2 takes two fuzzers. So string is a fuzzer and string is a fuzzer. And it passes them into this function as AB. And then we concatenate these two strings together with string concat. It's a silly.
No, I mean this, like what kind of strings will it generate? How long they are, and
it's just random. You have no control for this test now how they look like. So it's often used to, maybe I will make an example. I have to come out of this and I will do this, okay? And maybe change this to.
Or you can just make the test fail and it will write the expect like the.
Oh yeah, I can do that.
output.
That's a good idea. Thank you. So we do it like this. So it fails, and you see there was given exclamation mark and a space. So it's totally random, and you use it for like. Often I see a use case where you do call the function twice on the argument, and it is the same, so it's the identity, so it's the same value as before. Mm-hmm. So that's often a pattern you see with property-based testings. So it's at the beginning it's really hard to understand, to grasp how this test works, but it gives you a lot of security because it's not just mock input or fake data. It's just random, and your users are inputting random stuff. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, and then there is, for expect, there is like lesser than, greater than, and so on. Like everything you would expect from expect to have. And that's basically it for the basics for Elm tests. I will continue with server-side rendering if you don't have any questions.
Time for a question. What kind of stuff do you test? Because
that's a good question.
It's
Yeah.
often said about like if it's compiles and runs, so then you don't have write
Yes.
errors, right? Or
That's totally true. So you don't have to test things like if a function takes a number instead of a string, that it fails, because that's what the compiler is for. But you test stuff like if your logic is correct. If you have, for example, if you have you want to calculate the grade of a student, and you have different points for different stuff, and you have a complicated logic to calculate the grade, and you want to test that because that's the behavior of your function, which the compiler doesn't know about the behavior, or just minimal about the behavior of your function. So it doesn't know if you should multiply it by 2 or by 3 or something like that.
so would you say that compared to, for instance, JavaScript, in the L projects that you see, there's a smaller number of large tests rather than a large number of small tests?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's the way I see where you should use tests for in L. And yeah, I didn't write a lot of fast tests because we don't have them at NoRedink at the moment, or I don't know about them. And yeah, I will definitely use this when we are migrated to 0.17. Something else, or should I continue? I take that as a yes. So the next thing is Elm server-side rendering. Elm server-side renderer is a project of a friend of mine who works also at NoRedink, Noah. Maybe you saw him on GitHub. He's the guy with the strange username UE56. He did a lot for the Elm community, and he also wrote Elm server-side renderer. And that was, yeah, So Elm server-side renderer, I will switch back to my presentation for a second. Is not published and really experimental, and likely in 0.18 we will have server-side rendering from Elm. So Evan did just post on the Elm dev channel on Google on the mailing list, and he said what more or less his plans are for the next version, and that's one of it. And I think it will come, but until then we have to use Elm server-side render, and we actually don't use it at Nordic. We have something similar, which also I think Noah implemented. Yeah, but I think for now it's a nice tool to have for testing, and maybe you have use case for that. Okay, and so the thing is that it's not published, and it's really hard, or it's harder to get into your project. So here you see Elm server-side render, which is a clone of the GitHub repository. So I would also recommend to write a script to get it into your project. And after that you have to install the Elm dependencies, and that's it for here, more or less. The second thing you have to do is to add it as a source directory to your Elm package, and also to the test Elm package, so that every package knows about Elm server-side rendering. And the second change you have to do here is add native modules true, which allows you to call native JavaScript functions directly from your Elm code. So this is still not all of it, because Elm uses a namespace thing for your JavaScript functions. I will show you. In the native part of Elm server-side renderer, you see these helpers, and it has this strange name convention, user, project, native helpers. And I had to change this. Before it was EUE Elm server-side renderer, and that's the repository you set in your Elm package JSON. I'll show you in the Elm package JSON of Elm server-side renderer. I already changed it here, so it was like this. EUE, that's where you find the repository. So Elm make uses this to call functions in JavaScript. Okay, and that's it for how you set up Elm server-side renderer. The next thing is your tests, but first I will show you the view we are testing. It's a dumb one. It's just a div with h1, which has a title class, and that's it. So it's just an easy little view that you normally wouldn't have in a project, but it serves our case here. And the next thing is you have to import some stuff for rendering it. You need HTML to string, from HTML to string, which is in Elm server-side renderer, and you need query, which I paired with Noah to implement, which is not complete, but I think it's a start, and it's enough for now to test your use. Okay, so a view test looks like this. Up a bit. So again, you have a describe, and then you have a test and your callback. We have our view, title view, and we use HTML to string to generate the string. And here, for the first test, we just expect that it looks like this. So it renders the div, the h1, and the text inside. And if I change it to fails, and we see the output is this. Expected hello world, but it was no expected yellow world, but it was hello world. And to make more useful tests, you don't want always to like write down the whole rendered string of your HTML. And we implemented these query functions, which you can call directly on the view. You can query for class names, for IDs, for names, for attributes, and I think that's it for the moment. And yeah, we check here if, so we query for a title, and this returns a list. So this could obviously be more nicer for now, but it's a pattern we also use a lot, and I think we just expect that it has one item which has a title class. So, yeah.
Did you build an HTML parser for this, or did you use one?
I will show you how Noah implemented this. It's
Regular expressions.
yeah. No. Okay, so it's implemented like this. I didn't grasp all of it, but the basic thing is that he uses Cheerio. Oh, sorry, that's in our code base. Helpers, and there should be a second node type string, and yeah. So he calls here helper functions, which are native code, and you can see all the things it exposes. And there should be a little string. Sorry, I did just confuse, I think. Our code goes with this. Yeah, so it basically okay, no type to string is what, or basically we call first HTML to string, and this turns the HTML into node types, and node type is a type we define here in internals, in internal types, which I'll show you later, which is basically the tree. Sorry, I just forgot how it's called. And like the same bubble does, it's the same structure of the JSON. And maybe you'll see. So there are node entries and text tags for text and the string. And this is a node record which has a tag, children, facts, or for example attributes like class and so on. And that's basically the structure. And if you go back to HTML to string, we call here stringify, which is just JSON stringify. So it just takes the virtual DOM from Elm and stringifies it, and then pushes that into the internal node record type. So it's pretty simple, and we have something similar at our code base, but there we use Cheerio, so you can also do this with Cheerio or whatever library. You just need to take the virtual DOM from Elm and somehow create a string out of it.
The stringify, it works on Elm's internal representation of DOM, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
and I'll show you again here. So we have HTML message coming in, and it gets passed into stringify, and then we decode this with really complex decoder. That should be in here. Yeah. And it looks easy here, but it gets more complicated when you go to this and so on. So it's just decodes like you would decode a JSON from your backend. I think it's really clever, and yeah, but it's probably not useful anymore after the next version. We don't know. Okay, that's a really fast, small intro to how you could test your views. And here again, I would not just write tests like this. I would test if my model, which I pass into my view, produces HTML with, for example, a button that you can save something. So if you pass in like the editable, that your state is correct, that save button is enabled. So that's how I would write tests like this for L. And I think we write more tests like this I would say it's like half. We have tests for U testing, but also complicated functions which live mostly in the update or in the model.
So then
Can you
Yeah, I will come to that.
can you test more into like interactions?
Yeah, that's something you won't test with this.
Yeah.
That's something, if you want to test interactions, you need the WebDriver to start the browser, headless or not headless.
Okay.
And we use Capybara for that, which is the Ruby version of WebDriver, which is, I think, nicer than the Node implementation of WebDriver. Which I had the pleasure to work with Jasper. Yeah. But there is an Elm WebDriver which I couldn't install on my machine. I don't know why. So that's my hack projects. Maybe we want to work on try the Elm WebDriver if we can get it to work. Maybe it was just set up on my machine.
So
yeah.
I'm telling, so if you cannot simulate like clicks and types in and...
With the server-side rendering, no. You can expect that a non-click handler is set on something, but you can't click on something. That's not the reason for rendering it on the server side.
So nothing like React test utils simulate?
No, that's something you would... Maybe the future Elm server-side rendering has somehow...
Can't you put maybe like to JS DOM somehow all this stuff? And
I think you could do something like this. You can maybe that would be a nice project to work on, to use JS DOM and try to simulate stuff.
Interesting. I'll wait till 18 and then.
Okay, so I couldn't get it to work, but obviously some other people could get it to work. Maybe that's just my machine, because that's not my actual work machine. Because we use 0.16 and it's really hard to have both versions on your machine. There is LMN, but it somehow messes sometimes with L format. And yeah, so I have this machine for 0.17 and my work machine for 0.16. That's probably something else we could work on. And
version manager, that's what you need.
What?
A version manager like the NPM.
Yeah, that's my private one, and those ones from the company.
Have you considered installing Elm through NPM and then having NPM set up in your project so that you have a local version and not a global one?
That works, but Elm format doesn't allow local versions of, or it doesn't allow it for being editorials. Yeah.
So maybe that's also a hack project.
Yeah. And then the last one I will show you is doc testing. Who heard about doc tests? Maybe people from Python. So that's.
I have to go. Thanks very much.
So doc tests are tests for your documentation of functions. I will show you how this looks like. So I have a really simple module, and it has docs above the function, and maybe there will be something like this reverses the list or something, and then you have an example, and you have the value the function returns when you call it, and the same here for this function. And when I run this, that's also really similar to install. You can just npm install Elm doc tests and then just start using it in the project. Let's see. Okay, we have the function here, and you run it, and you see it's broken. That's something we should fix. And so because my editor uses Elm format, you see the comments get formatted differently, and I think Elm doc tests wants the comment right before the function. And I can't save it like that because Elm format always messes with my stuff. So I normally wouldn't even write my comments like this. I would write it like this. And then Elm format would be happy. But that's not the way it works, so it doesn't work if you write your comments like that, and so I need to open another editor and fix it, and sometimes it works now. It didn't work because, so you see it's really hard. You cannot parse this error message, so it should have nice error messages. So
it's testing the code in your
document. Yeah, sorry, I didn't tell you what the point of doc test is. So it tests this code, and it's really nice for people who write packages which get published on package manager, because usually you write your examples for a function like this inline in the comments, and yeah, you have no security that they are showing something that is not right. So this tests your documentation. And I think it's really nice because that's a test I wouldn't write a unit test for, because that's, yeah, somehow it's not useful. And I don't think I get it to run now. I don't know why. It did work before, as you see here. It should look like this, expected 9 or 10. So this sums up to 10, not 9. And this one did work, so 2 examples and 1 failed. And I'm sorry I don't know why. Oh, I think I. No, it's just 1 space. Sometimes it's a spacing. I don't know exactly what the problem is. Let's try just 1 test. You're lucky. Nope. Reverse. No.
Maybe just try the other one.
The demo gods are not good.
Is it the pipe does it have a space before? On line 4?
You mean like this? No. Yeah. Sorry.
What would happen if you have text in the comment? Will it just ignore it?
Yeah, you need this syntax to make it work. And because you need line comments for that, I would recommend using this for the call of your function and using another prefix for the result. So you don't need the dash dash. Yeah, or just make it work.
And at the bottom is a space between the dashes and the pipe. In the example at the bottom is a space between the dashes and the pipe at the bottom. And in the example section, under the module, to go a bit higher, there's a space between one or two spaces between the dashes and the pipe. Perhaps that's the problem.
Let's try. Yeah.
Very sticky.
Yeah, you see, it would be a nice tool, I think, and maybe one can make it work nicer, so that it has nicer error messages at least. But maybe we could try and implement it from scratch. I don't know what better works. Yeah, and that's basically my presentation. Yeah. Are there any questions or something else? Yeah.
Just philosophical question. Like test-driven development with Elm. Does it make any sense? Like, does it worth it? Like really, like red-green refactor or this kind of loop.
I don't know if people from Red Ink are doing it, but I never paired with someone who did it, like really test-driven. And I think you do it test-driven with the compiler. So the compiler is your
Okay. So like a failing compile is a failing test, kind of.
And then I usually do it like this. So I make really small steps so I can see that it compiles. And then when I have the thing I want to implement more or less ready, I try to implement a test to expect how it should behave. And sometimes it's like really hard to tell when you write a capybara test or WebDriver test or when you write the Elm test. Usually Elm tests are more secure than WebDriver tests because WebDriver is like, it's magic, everything. So you have a lot of race conditions when stuff is not rendered yet, and there are functions in capybara, so all waits for everything, waits for the stuff to be there, and yeah, it's all rendered. Find waits until your element is there, and all just renders, and then you get a failure, and yeah. Anything else? No.
The server-side rendering. I mean, you've shown us the use case for testing purposes.
Yeah.
Is there are there other use cases? I mean, is there the ability to improve performance of your application, or is it simply at the moment the use case to actually get the stuff to test and?
Yeah. So we do it just for testing at the moment, and as I told you before, the library is really experimental and it has only the minimum of functionality. So, for example, the querying is really basic, and but there are, I mean, people from the React world know that it increases your startup time from your app. So if you render some of your application on the server and ship it like this to the user, your app is faster. And I don't know how everything will look when the next version is here, but yeah, this would be a benefit. I think another benefit. I think that's the only two use cases for server-side rendering. I think. Okay. Thank you.
The font that you're using, it's Fira code.
Yeah.